Hello world, hi everyone. Python is a very popular, easy to use programming language that has a lot of applications. So let's write our first Python program. So I'll just go ahead into my VS Code, create a new file and say main. Now this main can be whatever you want. It can be name, it can be code, it can be your name or whatever it is, just anything that you want. But it needs to end with .py. That way VS Code can actually recognize that this file we're trying to create is going to contain Python program. So now you can see how I type it.py, the icon automatically changes. Then VS Code now sees that, okay, this is the Python logo because it's the Python file. Now let's just create the file. Now we have a Python file. Now before we begin to actually write code, let's lay a few ground rules. Now writing code or writing computer programs in any language is basically writing a set of instructions for your computer to follow in order to perform a task. Now, writing code means we're writing instructions for our computer to follow. Our computer will do basically anything we want it to do. So it's as simple as that. Just write code is a set of instructions that the computer just needs to follow. Now let's do the simplest thing we could do with Python programming. Let's print hello world into our terminal. Right. So now open my terminal and to run my code, I'll just use Python 3. For Windows devices, just Python. You have Python installed. So Python 3, then the name of my file, which is main.py. So if you have any other file that is not main, like you can see you have james.py that you created, you just run Python then james.py to run your code. Now just go ahead and run enter now, and now we have in our terminal hello world. Now this is because inside of our code we ordered our computer to display the content hello world. So that's why you can see the print function is a built-in function in Python that allows us to display content inside of our terminal. So anything you pass into this function, it's called a function, it's a built-in function. So anything you pass into this call, so let's say hello James, will be displayed in our terminal whenever we run our code. So I'll just go ahead and run the code again. We have hello James. So anything that we type in there, as long as it is anything, it's just displayed in a terminal for us. That's how it's designed. Now let's go ahead and try a few more things. Let's say hello, or I am learning how to code in Python. Now when I run my code again, I'm learning how to code in Python. Here you can see how we can begin to use this for different purposes, like displaying text in real life. So let's go ahead and do a few more cool things. Let's say we're trying to display a lot of text, right? We want to use multiple lines. So then in that case, we do something a little differently. Now you can see here we are wrapping everything that we want to type inside of quotes because it needs to be enclosed inside of quotes to keep track of what exactly it is we're trying to print or display in our terminal. Now to use this print function on multiple lines, you need to use triple quotes in this case. So let's go ahead and change a few things in our code. I'll just go ahead and delete this. Now we have 3 quotes and 3 quotes again. Now in the middle of the 3 quotes, I'll just go ahead and use the enter button. So now we have multiple lines. Now let's go ahead and say hello, I am Opelua Adeyeri and I am learning how to code. Now let me go ahead and run my code again. Now we have hello, I'm learning how to code. So this allows us to do multiple things, to print multiple texts into our terminal. So that's the purpose of the print function. Right, so now let's go ahead and see a few more cool things we could do with Python. So before we get to that, let's learn a few more things. Let's say let's learn variables in Python programming. Now variables are like labeled containers that allows us to store data. So a variable in real life is like storing like a bottle or different containers that we use to store different things. So we have a container that is specifically designed for the purpose to store like liquid content. We have a container designed to store solid things. So we have different containers that are labeled for different purposes. So that's the same thing with variables inside of Python programming and programming in general. It allows us to store data and it's labeled so we know which is which. So we have a container to store different types of data. For example, let's get to that. We have integers to store different numbers. We have floating point values to store numbers that have decimal points. We have boolean to store numbers that to store values that are true or false. That's a boolean. So it's just 2 possibilities. It's either true or it's false. So we use a boolean to store that kind of data. Then we also have the string to store text. But before we get to that, let's learn how to write comments in Python programming. Now, comments in Python programming allows us to keep track of what exactly it is we are doing in our code. So let's go to line 1 right here, for example, now, and say, okay, so we use the hash sign. So typing hash before any line of code in Python automatically changes the whole line to a comment, and it will be ignored by the compiler, by the interpreter when you're trying to run your code. So when you write hash before any line in Python programming, it automatically changes the line to a comment, and that means it will be ignored. It's not a part of the code, it's just a comment for you to, as the programmer, to read. So now let's say I am learning how to code right here in our comment. So now you can see right here is green. The color is different from the rest. That's because it's a comment and it will be ignored by the Python interpreter. So let's go ahead and come here, try to run my code again. Now you can see this is not really affecting anything because it's just a comment. It will be ignored. Now to write comments on multiple lines in Python, it's just like the same thing that we did here, allowing us to put down text on multiple lines. So we can do something like this and say triple text, and now you can say this is a multi line comments in Python, in my Python code. Right, so we can also have multiple things here. I am learning how to code. Now this triple quotes, double quotes in this case, allows us to write multiple lines of text inside of Python. So the first one is just the hash sign, meaning we have only one line. And now as soon as I enter to the next line, everything I write is going to be read as part of the code, except I begin that also using the hash sign inside of my editor. Let me just go ahead and delete this and see if our code still works fine even after I added the multi-line comments. Just go ahead and write this, and we still have our code running exactly the same, printing the same things, because this is a comment and to be ignored by interpreter. Now let's get back to the variables. I'm going to be using the comments to just identify a few of those. So let me just go ahead and remove this. Go to a new line. Now variables. So let's say so we are going to take 4 basic types of variables in this video. So let's go ahead and say the integer. Now the integer is used to store numbers like 1, like 40, like 68, and basically any number that does not have a decimal point. So now we can use floating point values called floats to store numbers that have decimal points, like 3.1, like 5 or 6.78 or 28. Then we can also say like 900 or 800.12129 So these floating point values allows us to store numbers with decimal points. Meanwhile, the integers only store numbers. It ignores the decimal points in the numbers. So that's not just a part of it. So now let's just go ahead and go to the next one, which is the string. Now the string allows us to store data like text or characters. So something like this, you can say hello is a text. So this is going to be stored by a variable which is of type string, because it's a text in this case. So you can basically be anything. It can be a sentence entirely. It can be like, hello James, nice to meet you. And this is also going to be stored by the same type of variable because it's a string and it's just a line of text. So now we also have one more. Let's take one more, which is the boolean. The boolean only stores 2 values, 2 different types of values, which is true or false. So a boolean can only be one of these 2 things. It's either true or false. So just those 2 possibilities. We use booleans to determine either things are correct or incorrect, either it's valid or not. So let's say we ask the user a question like, are you a man? And the user says yes or no. So we have true or false, true for yes, false for no. So we use the boolean for those types of data. So now let's create a few variables and see what it looks like. So now to use a variable, we need to create a name for our variable because it's a labeled container. So we use the name. So let's say my name equals, I'm going to be using a string. Every time that we're trying to work with a string in Python, it needs to be surrounded by quotes. Either it's a single quote or a double quote. So let's say my name equals Opeoluwa. And now what I just did here is I created a variable, which is my name. So I created a labeled container. The label on the container is my name. So every time I look at any container that I want to see and I check the container, it's going to be labeled my name and it's going to contain Opeoluwa, which is what I stored inside. So now we have a variable. The name of the variable is my name and it contains Opeoluwa. So now every time I want to check my name, I just need to check the variable and I'm going to see that it actually contains Opeoluwa, whatever it is I choose to store inside. So now I can also use double quote for this. It's a string, so it can use either single or double quote. So let's come back here and say my last name. I can use double quotes for this, so it really makes no difference. It all serves the same purpose, but it's just recommendable to use, like, if you're going to use single quotes across your code, use single quotes all the same. So it's not really reasonable to just go in between, use single quotes in the first line, use double quotes in the second line. It's just not, it doesn't really look too good. So it's not like it's required or something, but you can use double or single quotes. Depends on your preference. So now let's just go to the next one and say, to store numbers, let's say distance equals 89. So now I have a variable called distance that stores a number, which is 89. So now the type of this number, this type of this variable is going to be of type integer because it stores a number. And then I can go to the next one and say length equals 7.9. Now the type of this length variable is going to be of type floating point value. It's like a float variable because it stores a number that contains a decimal point. So it's going to be of type float by default. So Python already just goes, immediately Python is interpreting our code and trying to run it in a terminal. It automatically checks for the types of these variables because it's typing automatically. So it just goes ahead and sees, okay, my name equals Opeoluwa, my name is a string. Checks my last name equals Adeyeri, my last name is a string also. Checks the distance and see it's an integer. So then it automatically determines this value. So now let's say another variable is name equals. So now for this one, I'll just say, or is male actually. I'll just say true. Now this means I have a Boolean value is male. So this is like a question. So like, am I a male or not? Like, am I a man or not? So this means if it's true, it means I'm male. If it's false, it means I'm not. So you get the idea. So this is just to determine, like, to answers to questions, true or false. So now let's go ahead and I can just come and say false. Also, so it can be true or false. Any other thing, and it's just going to be not. It will be no longer a Boolean value. So now let's just go ahead and use a few of these variables inside of our Python code. Now the print function also, let's get back to the print function, allows us to print variables because we can now check what's inside of the variables. Now let's go ahead and go to a new line. Let me now say print and come here, say my name. So now what this print my name is doing is that it goes ahead and tries to print the contents of my name. So what it does is when I run the print my name function, it checks the my name container and checks for what is inside, then returns it back to me so I can print it in my terminal. So when I come back to my code now, run it again, we have Opeoluwa, right? So before we get to that, let me just go ahead and comment these lines. So now to automatically comment multiple lines inside of your VS Code, just go ahead and highlight the lines you want to comment and just put Ctrl/. So that automatically highlights everything. So that's a few shortcuts that can make your work much easier. So I'll just comment that line, which means it will now be ignored by my Python interpreter. So when I run my code again, that would have no effect in my code. So now we have only Opeoluwa because that's what I'm printing in this line, right? So now so what happened here is when I run the print my name, the Python interpreter goes into my variable and checks inside of it and sees, okay, this variable contains Opeoluwa and prints it to me. So it can be anything I want. When I come here and change it to, let's say James, when I run my code again, we have James. So it's going to be dynamic. Anything that is inside of the variable will be printed out to the terminal. Now let's go ahead and say print, comma, So the print function allows us to also display multiple contents at the same time. So I can just say print, comma, my name and my last name. Now let's just go over this again, run my code again, and now we have James and then we have Adeyeri. So now we've been able to print multiple things instead of our terminal. I can just come here and keep appending multiple lines. I can say I also want to print the distance, so I'll say distance, then I'll run my code again. Now this time we have 89, so we can keep doing this for as many variables as we want. So let's just go to the next thing. So let me just go ahead and go to a new line. Now we've been able to print multiple things using the print function. We'll be able to print variables, right? But now let's say we're trying to print variables in sense of like trying to append a variable to a string. So let's say we have a variable that contains notifications. So let's say I have a variable, the variable name is notifications, and let's say I have like 100 notifications on my phone. Let's say I have 100 notifications. So when I go into my print function and say print notifications, so now this will just print like the random text for me, right? So now I come here, I have notifications, but now I want this thing to show like you have 100 notifications, or you have 10 notifications, or you have 15 notifications according to the number of notifications I have on my phone. So now that means we can use to achieve that purpose, we can use what is called a format string in Python. So format strings allows us to intertwine text and variables together. So I can print a text that is going to be predefined inside of my print function, and then I can insert variables. So when I have 10 notifications, it will show in my terminal that you have 10 notifications. When I have 20, to show you have 20 notifications, and things like that. So let's learn how to use format strings in Python programming. Now just go ahead and put the F sign, letter before my text inside of my print function. So now to use format strings, we have the F for formats inside of our print function. That will come before the quotes. So either is single or double quotes, it just needs to come before the quotes. Now to now add the variables, what I just need to do is go put like a space, then I can just put open and close curly braces. Now this, anything that comes in between these curly braces is going to be like a Python expression or a Python variable. So I can just come here and put notifications, and now anything that is going to be in my notification will now come here. So now when I run my code again, we have notifications 100. If I change my notifications to like 20, let's say 20 in this case, when I run this again, we have notifications and then 20. So now this means it's now dynamic, appending the contents of notifications to the string anytime I run my code. So now I can now change this to something like you have then space notifications. Right, so now when I run my code again, we have 20 notifications. So this allows us to intertwine variables and then text all together to display like dynamic content inside of our terminal. Now I can change this to 87. When I run my code again, you have 87 notifications. You can see how this can be applied in terms of notifications or different things using your devices, your phones and laptops and everything. So this is used a lot. So now let's go to the next steps and saying the second way to use format strings. So let's go ahead and see another way we could use to use the format string in Python. So now let's say you just don't like to use this F before your string. Now let's just go ahead and see one more way we could actually use it. So let me just go ahead and put this again. I'll use this same syntax I have here. So let me just go ahead and copy this and paste it without actually using the F sign right there. So I just want the text. I'm going to remove this. Right, I'm going to remove this, and now, so I just open and close bracket. Now after this, you can see here you have open and close brackets notifications. So this is telling my Python interpreter that okay, inside of this place a variable is coming there. I don't know what it is yet, but just keep space for this variable. That means it's like a placeholder, meaning I'm just telling my Python interpreter that okay, this place is going to be like a reserved space, a placeholder for a variable that is coming. I don't know what it is yet, but just keep that space, like an empty chair for someone to come and sit in. So like this is going to keep the space in that block for like a variable to come and just take the place. So now after this, I just need to put the dot format. Now the dot format is like a method that we can use to append different variables. So now to take open and close brackets, and then I'll now put my variable inside. So now I'll just come here and put notifications. So now this will achieve the exact same purpose that this first one has. It's just a different way of doing things. So when I run my code again, you can see it has the same responses. So you have 87 notifications come twice. Now to see that it's actually different, so I'm just go ahead and come here and say you have 18 notifications, line 2. So now when I run my code again, you can see the line 2 comes from this one. So it performs the exact same thing, the exact same way, but just using different syntax. So this happens a lot when you're writing code. They are usually different like 1,000 ways to solve the same problem. So there's always different ideas that come from different people, and you have different ways to solve problems in Python, in programming in general. So you have different applications to do the exact same things. It's just your preference, really. So now let's come here. I'm going to remove this line because I think it's much easier to use the first one. I'll just come here and say notifications, and let's create one more variable. So I'd say notifications, and also let's say messages. Let's set that to 10, and now I'll just go ahead and put inside of this place messages. So now when I run my code again, you have 87 notifications and 10 messages. So that's it about format strings in Python. So let's also print a few more things. Let's print Ismail. Now you can see here we have false, but you just go ahead and change this to true. Now you can see how we have the capital T for true and the capital F, like the uppercase F for T and uppercase F for false in this case. It's because that's how Python was designed. That's like a reserved keyword. True or false are reserved keywords. So you cannot name your variable true or false. That's because it's a reserved keyword in Python, and it needs to start with uppercase because that's how it was just designed. Now we can just go ahead and come back here, run the code again, and now we have true. Now that we've learned how to use variables inside of Python programming, now let's get to using arithmetic operations to add numbers, subtract, and divide numbers inside of Python programming. So let me just go ahead and change this a little, rename my file to hello.py. Also, I'll create a new file just for the arithmetic operations. Operations.py. So now what we want to do is create two different variables here and try to add them or perform different arithmetic operations on them, like add, subtract, divide, and multiply. So let's create two different variables here. So let's say num1 equals say 10, num2 equals 87. So right here we're going to learn another feature that the equals to sign has in this case. By default, we just use the equals to sign to set like the value of variables. So like num equals 87, which meaning we are storing the value of 87 inside num, which is the variable that we have here, num2. We also use the equal sign to like store the response or the return value of an operation on the right side to the left side. So now, what I mean is when we try to add these two numbers and store the the response of the addition inside of another variable, we use the equals to sign also. So I can do something like this, sum or addition, using a different variable now, equals to num1 plus num2. So the response of this operation, we are trying to add two numbers, will be stored inside of the new variable addition. So now when I print addition, it should contain the addition of both numbers, which is 10 and 87, which should be 97. So now let me just go ahead and print addition. Let's see how this responds. So I'll go ahead and run my code, Python 3, then operations.py. And now we have 97 as our response. To do subtraction, we just change this plus to the minus sign, and I run this again. We have minus 77 because 10 minus 87 is actually minus 77. So we can also use the multiplication Instead, since we don't have the multiplication sign on our keyboard, which is just it's just the X, which is used for that purpose. So we use the asterisk or the sign or the star sign to do multiplication operations inside Python. So when I go ahead and use the Python operations.py, we have 870 because that's the multiplication. But for divide also, we don't have the divide sign on our keyboard, so we just use the / to do divide. When I run my code again, we have 0.111. So here you can see that Python automatically determines the type of the variable, because when we added our numbers by default or subtracted or divided or multiplied, we are still getting like integers, which is normal numbers. But then when we got the floating point value, that means the type of this variable would now be float, because we are now using a number that have decimal points to store instead of the addition variable. So now the type of this num1 is integer, type of num2 is integer, but type of for addition, that one is floating point. It's a float value. So now let's try to use the format string to actually print this. But also, instead of using the format string inside of the print variable itself, we can also use the format string like outside of the print function. So we can just say my response equals, then we can use the format string, the same syntax right here. So let's say f, and then we have the open and close brackets, num1 space plus num2 in brackets also, then equals to, then we have addition. Let me just go ahead and change this back to plus sign. So now when I run my code, let me go ahead and print response instead. So print my response. Now we've been able to use the num1, num2, and num3. So now we should be having 10 plus 87 equals 97 as the response of our code now when we run it again. So let me just go ahead and run it, and we have 10 plus 87 equals 97. So anything that we basically put in here, so let me say this should be 118. When I run my code again, we have 118, 87, 205. Now we've been able to do arithmetic operations like addition, division, and multiplication inside of our code. But we can also do something like square or square root. So let's go ahead and try that. Let's just do the square actually. So let's try to get the square of a variable in Python. So let me just come here, define a variable. So let's say my var equals 9. So let's try to get and print the square of 9. So there are two ways we could do that. We could just use the normal print, because to get the square of a number, we just multiply it by itself, right? 9 times 9 is the square of 9. So let's try to do that. So let's say my var times my var. So we are printing the multiplication of the number by itself, and this should get 81. So when I go run my code again, we have 81 as a response of that arithmetic operation, which is the square of the number. But let's say we're trying to get the root, the cube of a number, or the power of 4, the power of 5. That's a little more we cannot just continue to use my var times my var times my var. So there's a shortcut for that in Python. So instead of just using the times, we use the double asterisk. In this case, that means we're trying to use the power. So when I say my var double asterisk then 1, that means I'm saying my var to the power of 1. When I run my code again, we should have 9. When I set it to 2, we have to the power of 2. Run my code again, we have 81. Set it to 3 and we have cube, that's to the power of 3. And we have 7 to 9. So this continues. You can use this for any number that you want. So let's change this to 3 to the power of 3. We have 27. So that way we've been able to get the square cubed of numbers inside of Python using arithmetic operations. But also we can actually add two different strings together. It's called concatenation. So we can add two different strings together for a reason or the other. So let's come back here and try to do something like this. Let me say my first name equals, then let's say Jarvis, last name equals Friday, and now let's try to get the full name using just these two values. So let's say full name equals first name plus last name. Now when I just try to print the value of full name, so let me say print full name, and now when I run my code, we should be having Jarvis and Friday stuck together. Now when I run my code again, now you can see Jarvis Friday. That's because we added those two strings together, and they will just be like matched together into a single string. That way we have Jarvis and Friday. So anything basically. Now let's try to make this a little different. Instead of just using the plus sign, let's try to use the format string in this place, so we can actually add some spaces or some more text in this case. So let me change this to a format string, the F sign. So now here, let's say first name space, then last name. Now when I run my code again, we have Jarvis Friday with space. So now we can also do something like this. We can change this to greet. Now right here, I can just say hello, then come back here and say hello Jarvis Friday. Almost all of the programs that we use on our computers today actually requires that we actually enter inputs, like interact with the application or the program in some way or the other. So let's learn how to get the user inputs inside of our Python program. So for that, we use the input function. The input function allows us to ask the user to type in something inside of their terminal, and we can actually see what they're typing and use it inside of our program. So let's learn how to use the input function in Python. So let's say user input. So we are creating a variable. Then we're going to call the input function. The input function takes in an argument to like provide whatever you want to show the user before they begin typing, like enter your name, so the user can see that, okay, this program wants me to type in my name in here, or enter your age, or enter whatever it is that you want the user to enter. So like you show some information about what you want the user to actually be typing, not just blank page. So let's say enter or type anything. And let's now, like, since the as soon as the user types in something and clicks the enter button, it's going to be saved inside of this user input. So now we can print it and see what it looks like. So let's say print. Let's use the F string. Now let's say you typed and the contents that the user typed. So let's say user input. Now let's run this code and see how it works. So let's say Python 3 main.py. Now let's say type anything. So let's say hello world, and now you can see here we have you typed hello world. So we can actually use this to like get a user's name or get a user's age and actually begin to use this data in our program. Let's change this. Let's say name equals input enter your name. And now let's try to greet the user using this information. So let's say print format string hello, then name. Now when I run my code again, it's going to ask for my name, and whenever I type in my name there, so let's say James, hello James. When I run my code again, let's say Jarvis, hello Jarvis. Now we need to get the user input, but let's say we're trying to get like input of numbers to do a calculation, like in the arithmetic operations, for example. Let's go back to the code and actually make some changes to that. So here we have num1 and num2, and we're trying to add these two values together. So let me just go ahead and comment this part of the code because we don't need these ones anymore. Let me just delete it. So let me just clear this ones. Response. Okay, so now let's actually change this num1 and num2, so you actually get the input from the user instead of just typing it inside of our code like this. So let's change this to input. Let's say input enter the first number right. So we have for the second one input again, then enter the second number. So and now let's run this code and see how it actually reacts. So let's say Python 3 then operations.py. Now you can see enter the first number, let's say 9, enter the second number, let's say 2. Now you can see here it's not reacting exactly the way we want it to. It's saying 9 plus 2 equals 92. Technically it's correct. So whenever you type and whenever you write an input function, whenever you use the input function in Python, it stores your data in text. So this num1 and num2 are not of type integer. So you remember when we had two strings together or text together, it just like merged them together into one single text. So when we typed 9 and 2, it just joined together and become 92. It's not like it really did any calculation there. So in order to use this feature to like add numbers inside of our code, we need to change the input from text to number, or an integer in this case. So let's try to do something like this. We know we have the int data type, so we also have the int operator inside of Python. So what we just need to do is wrap this in quotes and say, in bracket actually, and say int. So this would change the response of this user's inputs to convert it into a number, so we can actually use that number for an integer calculation in this case. So let's do the same for this place. Let's cover this in brackets and convert it to an integer also. So this would change the input from text or string to a number that we can use to calculate actually. So now let's just run our code again. And now when I say 7, 2, we have 7 plus 2 equals 9. When I say 9 or 98, 19, we have 117. So now we've been able to get inputs using our users data, like getting input from the user and using in our program now. But also, let's say we're trying to get a floating point value. That means we'll have to use float also, because now if I should begin to type, when I run this now and say 8.37, as you can see here now, it's saying int, but we're having float. So that's the error that it's going to come up with. So now if you want to allow us to use like floating point values here, we'll have to change this int to float. And now when I run my code again, 8.39, now we have the response. So that's how to handle data types and inputs from the user inside of Python programming.